Welcome to Mr. Hutchings' History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a deep dive into a pivotal period in Nelson Mandela's life. His journey from peaceful protest to leading the armed struggle against apartheid.
A fascinating transition.
It really is. We're going to try to unpack just what led to the creation of Umkhonto-we-Sizwe, the ANC's armed wing. I'm really excited to get into this one.
Yeah.
So to start, can you give us a little background on the ANC's stance on armed resistance in the years leading up to Sharpeville?
Well, it's really important to understand that the ANC, especially under Mandela's leadership, was truly committed to nonviolent resistance for years. Their strategy really hinged on exposing just how brutal the apartheid regime was to the entire world, hoping to incite global pressure for change and maybe even internal reform.
So what changed? What made them make that monumental shift in strategy?
Sharpeville. The Sharpeville massacre in 1960, it was a major turning point. Imagine hundreds of peaceful protesters, completely unarmed, demonstrating against these unjust past laws, and they were met with just this brutal force by the South African police. The world watched in horror as these unarmed civilians were just gunned down.
It's just unimaginable, the brutality.
It was a watershed moment, and for the ANC, it shattered any hope that peaceful demonstrations would change the apartheid government's mind. They had to confront a chilling truth. This regime would use any force necessary to stay in power.
Wow. So how did the ANC respond after such a horrific event?
The formation of Umkhonto-we-Sizwe, also known as MK, which translates to Spear of the Nation.
Okay.
This marked really the birth of the ANC's armed wing, created as a direct response to Sharpeville.
Okay, so MK is formed, but they aren't aiming for all-out war, are they? What was their approach?
Absolutely not. It's critical to understand that MK's strategy was sabotage, really. Their focus was crippling government infrastructure, power lines, transportation, anything that fueled the apartheid state. But, and this is very important, they made a huge effort to minimize civilian casualties.
That distinction had to be important, right?
Absolutely. Both strategically and morally. It was a calculated decision to show the world that they weren't terrorists, they were fighting for justice and equality. It was a delicate balance to dismantle this oppressive system without resorting to the same violence.
So they shift towards armed resistance, but it isn't a complete change, is it? There's also a division, geographically, in the leadership itself at this time. Mandela is in South Africa, but Oliver Tambo is operating from exile. Can you unpack that a bit?
Absolutely. While Mandela was in South Africa leading MK operations from within the country, Oliver Tambo went into exile and became the international voice of the ANC. He was out there rallying global support and really pressuring governments around the world to take a stance against apartheid.
So they were tackling the issue from multiple angles, even when geographically separated.
Precisely. It speaks to just how multifaceted their approach to dismantling apartheid was. Strategic sabotage operations on the one hand, and building a global anti-apartheid movement on the other.
So Mandela is leading MK from within South Africa, but as we know, he's eventually arrested. What led to his arrest?
So in 1962, Mandela is arrested, but, and this is interesting, he wasn't actually arrested for his role in MK at that time.
Oh.
Yeah, the initial charges were related to him leaving the country illegally. He had gone abroad, you see, to gain support for the armed struggle, and that's what got him a 5-year prison sentence.
So his leadership of MK remained a secret.
Yes, for the time being. But that was all about to change with the Rivonia raid.
I bet that event really shook things up.
It did. Imagine in 1963, authorities raided Lily's Leaf Farm, a seemingly normal place on the outskirts of Johannesburg. What they didn't know was that it was the secret headquarters of MK.
Wow, what a discovery.
It really was a major turning point. Not only did they find Mandela and other high-ranking ANC members, but they also uncovered a bunch of documents directly linking Mandela to MK's activities.
And this is where the stakes get even higher.
For sure. This wasn't about leaving the country illegally anymore. This was about plotting to overthrow the government, and they were facing serious, serious charges, maybe even the death penalty.
So the Rivonia raid changes everything. Now Mandela and his comrades are facing the full force of the apartheid state.
Yeah, it was a huge turning point. And here's what's fascinating. Instead of just crumbling under the pressure of the charges against them, Mandela and the ANC, they used the trial to their advantage. They turned the courtroom into a platform to tell the world about the evils of apartheid.
Really? So they're literally on trial for their lives, and they use it as a way to further their message. Talk about thinking on your feet.
It was honestly a brilliant move. They knew the whole world was watching and they weren't going to waste the opportunity. Instead of just trying to defend themselves, they put apartheid itself on trial.
Okay, so let's get into the trial itself. I know Mandela's speech at the Rivonia trial is the stuff of legend. What was it about that speech that made it so powerful?
Well, it was a masterpiece, just masterful oratory. But beyond that, it was this searing indictment of apartheid. It was this powerful, powerful articulation of what the ANC's vision for South Africa was, a vision of a just and free South Africa. You see, it was Mandela's decision to deliver a statement directly to the court instead of a regular testimony. That decision allowed him to control exactly what he wanted to say. He spoke directly to the court, to the world, really, uninterrupted for something like 4 hours.
And I bet you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. What were some of the big themes he tackled in that speech?
Well, first, he went straight at this idea that they hated white South Africans, which is something the apartheid regime had really pushed, this idea that the ANC was a hate group that wanted to be violent toward white people.
Which, of course, wasn't true at all, as we've seen.
Right, and Mandela addressed that right away. He emphasized that their fight, the ANC's fight, was never against white people. It was against the system of apartheid itself.
He drew a clear line between being against the system and hating individuals.
Exactly. And then he took it even a step further and talked about this future South Africa where all races could live peacefully together with the same rights and opportunities.
So the really strong counter-narrative to what the apartheid regime was trying to sell. But they also had to address this idea of them being communists, right?
Oh, absolutely. The apartheid regime, they just love to slap that label on the ANC, calling them communists to scare the West.
I mean, it was the Cold War.
Exactly. And Mandela, he tackled that head on, too. He acknowledged that, yeah, the ANC, they supported nationalizing some industries, and he was very clear about this wasn't about some communist takeover. It was about dismantling these racial monopolies that were at the core of apartheid. He argued that in a post-apartheid South Africa, everybody deserved a fair shot.
So he's systematically taking apart all the prosecution's arguments while also laying out this vision for the future. It makes sense that his speech became so important.
And then he delivers what might be the most well-known line of the whole speech. "It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die."
Wow. Even now, it gives me chills. Just imagine sitting in that courtroom and hearing him say those words out loud. I can only imagine the reaction in the courtroom after he said that. Even now, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's the thing about Mandela's words. They were powerful. He wasn't just talking to the judge and the jury. He was talking to everyone. It went way beyond just that trial and really resonated with anyone who believes in justice and freedom.
And that message, that dedication to his ideals, it didn't stop at the courtroom doors.
Not even close. And you have to remember, this was the middle of the Cold War. The apartheid regime was really trying to make the ANC out to be this communist threat. But Mandela's words, they cut right through all that. He showed everyone what the struggle was really about, a fight for equality, a fight for basic human rights.
So after such a powerful, defiant speech, what happened? What was the verdict?
Well, the court, they found Mandela and 7 others guilty. But, and I think this is really important, they were sentenced to life in prison, not death.
That's a big difference given the charges they were facing.
It was. A lot of people think that the global attention on the trial, the fact that the whole world was listening to Mandela's words, that it all played a role in the judge's decision. The apartheid regime, they were under a lot of pressure at that point, and they couldn't just silence him completely, not without there being consequences.
So even in prison, Mandela's message was having an impact.
Definitely. The Rivonia trial, it was a huge turning point in the fight against apartheid. It's strange, it silenced Mandela in a physical sense, but it also made his message so much louder across the world.
It's almost like they gave him an even bigger platform by trying to shut him up.
Exactly, and that's what's so important about the Rivonia trial. Mandela and a lot of other important ANC figures went to prison, but the global anti-apartheid movement, it just exploded. People all over the world, they were so inspired by Mandela's courage, his way with words, his dedication to justice, and they rallied behind him. They started putting pressure on their own governments to take a stand against apartheid.
So this moment, this change in Mandela from peaceful resistance to leading an armed struggle, ending in the Rivonia trial, it wasn't just something that happened in South Africa, was it?
No, not at all. It affected the whole world. It's a story about courage, about standing up for what you believe in even when the odds are stacked against you. It shows us that fighting for justice and equality, those ideas, they can spread and inspire action all over the world.
It's a powerful reminder that change is rarely easy, But with enough determination, even systems that seem impossible to change can be challenged and eventually taken down.
Exactly. And that's why Mandela's story still feels relevant today. It's a source of inspiration for anyone fighting for a more just world.
And there you have it, folks, your deep dive into Nelson Mandela's incredible journey from peaceful protests to armed resistance and the historic Rivonia trial. A story about courage, conviction, and the hope for a better future. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings' History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.